So another thing about kumquats, heavy, heavy producers. When you get a kumquat, you get a lot of fruit. There's orange quartz, lime quartz, and all these other quartz. They always are heavy producers. There's tons of fruit that come off of them. Because if you ever look at a kumquat tree, it's just dripping. Ours is just ripening now. I mean, we have like, quarts and quarts of bushels of these fruit.
You're listening to the Food Garden Life Show, the show that helps you grow food, whether it's on a balcony, in a backyard, or bigger. I'm your host, Stephen Biggs.
And I'm your host, Donna Balzer. Together we talk with gardening experts, and we talk about what we've done in our years in the horticultural trade, helping you bend the rules and grow food in a way that suits you and your growing zone.
Donna, I'm so excited that we'll be talking about citrus as houseplants today with Byron from Logie's Greenhouse. And of course, you and I have talked lots about citrus over the years because I grow my citrus here and I have that one lemon tree that's older than I am. And you've grown citrus on the West Coast, but is there anything that's on your mind as we go into our chat with Byron?
I just can't wait to talk to Byron. His book is so excellent, so many tips and details. So I'm just packed with questions about growing citrus indoors.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking forward to it. His top tips, and we'll talk about, of course, lemons and some of the common citrus, but I know he does lots of less common ones too. So I think for me, I'm interested in that. And then there's this, a bit of a personal story to this too, Donna, is that over 30 years ago, when I had a little greenhouse business with a friend, he ordered this box of plants from Logie's. And when it arrived, I was allowed to stand there with him and watch as he lovingly unpacked all of these special things that he couldn't find around here. So I'm kind of just excited about connecting with Byron for that reason.
And I was the same. I got his newsletter in the days when people mailed things out to you. Way back when I was a university student, there's always been this excitement about Logie's Greenhouse. It's famous for its unusual plants. And I just can't wait to talk to him.
Good. Me too. And we'll talk after. And now here's our chat with Byron Martin. Byron is owner of Logie's Greenhouse and also the author of Edible Houseplants, Grow Your Own Citrus, Coffee, Vanilla, and 43 Other Tasty Tropical Plants.
My first question, Byron, I wondered if you have a favorite. There's so many citrus, and if we're just narrowing it down to citrus right now, there are so many citrus in your book. Do you have a favorite?
My favorites constantly change. And that happens because we find new things and surprises come. And so probably because the book has been written for a while, my favorites have moved outside the book. I think that our Australian bloodline was far enough back that we still grow that. And that really is a very interesting citrus plant, and mainly because of its productivity. If you go to look at the finger limes, the world of finger limes, they can be productive plants, but in containers, they tend to be somewhat sparse. They're also a very broad, spiky plant. I mean, they don't have a very good form to them. Whereas the Australian blood lime, which is a hybrid between a Rangpur lime and the Sanguinella finger lime, that's the red finger lime, tends to have a very contained and weeping habit to it. And on the front cover of our book, there's a picture of that plant. But when you talk to growers that have grown these finger limes, they're always astounded by the production that plant has. The other thing really interesting about it is, and that you're speaking of it right now, is just yesterday I was in the greenhouses walking around looking at things, as I often do, and I ran into this really fragrant, sweet, sweet smell. And it was the finger lime, and it's not a citrus fragrance. It's a perfume.
Wow.
And it flowers over a relatively long period of time relative to citrus, and it has a couple of flowering cycles a year, but it's really, really just a deep, deep fragrance. Well, I mean, it's not citrus at all. It's perfume, going maybe towards gardenias and jasmines and things like that, which is really peculiar because finger limes don't have much fragrance at all. and limes have the fragrance of a lime or a lemon. So I have no idea where this came from, but it's very much worth growing. And it's a plant that for container folks, it doesn't ever get very big. My original plant, which is on the front cover of the book, is the same size as it's always been. It's always weak. If you Google that and you go and look at blood limes of Australia, you'll see pictures of them where they've been growing them commercially in groves. And they don't go up. They literally just turn into these weeping bushes. So that's a favorite. The other one that I've run into recently, and I've had it around for a while, we tried it on off, is a pomelo. That it takes more space, but if you've never tasted sugar in a citrus, the pomelo is pretty close to top. But it is a big plant. And, the interesting thing is pomelo is, one of the parents of the grapefruit, but it has a different texture to it. It's more it's stiffer. It's not as juicy, but it is juicy. It's got the juice vesicles are very big and kind of like stuck together. So when you bite into it, it has a crispiness to it. But the sugar content is very, very high. And yet, the problem, of course, with that is it's a big grower. It puts out a huge fruit, but, you've also got to have room for a big plant to come in. And the one we are growing is a variety called Chandler, which, interestingly enough, if it's grown outside in a grove where it's got pollinators nearby, it fills itself full of seeds. But if you grow it in a container in a greenhouse in Connecticut where there's not a lot of things in flower when it's blooming and there aren't many bugs around, it comes out seedless. And then lastly, which again is a plant that's probably not in the book, is our Jujitsu sweet lemon. And this is a pear-shaped yellow citrus fruit. It has a very nice habit to it in that it's not as confined, but this has a little more contained and weeping habit, although somewhat loose. It's a very good producer. So many people don't know that citrus sometimes are yearly blooming or they're biannually blooming. They bloom every other year. This one flowers regularly every year for us. And the fruit it's not really a lemon now, by the way, but it's yellow as a lemon and it looks like a pear. So the fruit are easy to peel. They're seedless and they're really, really sweet. So whenever we have the fruit of it, we harvest the fruit off of our tree. We leave it for people to see in the greenhouse, but eventually we get to pick it. Everybody wants it in the greenhouse, wants to eat them because they have so much sugar in them. And it's kind of jujitsu, I think it's Japanese. It's really, what it is it's a yellow tangelo. The tangelo, the viola tangelo and all that. Well, this is a yellow form of it, which, you can see where the grapefruit and the tangerine kind of came together. And I guess the grapefruit won over in terms of the color of the skin. Yeah. Those are my favorites at the time, but that will change too.
Wow. And 3 vastly different citrus fruit. That's really interesting. I'm interested, jumping back to the blood lime, for people who haven't seen one before. How is that eaten? What do you do with it?
So the finger lime is a long, thin, looks like a finger. And when you cut it open and you break it apart, the juice vesicles are little round beads and they kind of fall out. And you can literally cut it in half. They kind of break out of the flesh and then you scrape them out. And oftentimes these limes have seeds in them, so you have to pick the seeds out. But and then they're crunchy, so you bite into them, and there's citric acid in them. I don't know if it really tastes like a lime; it's just sour, right? But what we do is we put them on salads. So when you're eating the salad, you get this crunchy, sparkly thing happening in the salad, along with the acidity of the citric acid. So the blood lime is a hybrid, but its vesicles are not as round. They have a little more elongation to them, but they do break open like that, and you can peel them out in the same way. And there's not that many. There are seeds in it, but there's not as many seeds as we often find in the finger limes.
Okay. Oh, I love the sound of that. Donna, I've already added a plant to my must-get list.
Yeah,
I know. When you find one, send it to me. We want to start a smuggling operation here. I am so excited about that. I have grown finger lime, and I love how they explode with flavor like you're describing. So can't wait for
they're
the
a lot of fun.
I wanted to ask just about lemon, because I think that's a citrus that all listeners will be familiar with, and a lot of people grow it even in cold climates. So what do you tell people who are thinking about growing a lemon tree?
So the lemon and the lime are two citrus that have a very long flowering and fruiting cycle. And literally the lemon tree can flower almost year round. Whereas if you go back to the grapefruit, or, we're talking about the Jiu-Jitsu, Tangelo or lemon, they have a set time. When springtime comes, they're actually budding up right now in the greenhouses. It's going to be a huge flush of flowers. The whole greenhouse smells like citrus, and then it's gone. And there can be occasionally later blooms, but the lemons and the limes, they do have that same cycle of the, late winter, early spring, but then it goes on. So our Ponderosa lemon has this long, many, many months of fruiting where, you have ripe fruit on the tree and you have green fruit starting, and you can find flowers on it and so on. And most lemons do that. We grow mainly the Ponderosa and Meyer. And the Meyer lemon is an interesting plant in that it's a hybrid between a lemon and a sour orange. It was originally brought out of China and to Fairchild Gardens, I believe is where it first came in. And it has cold tolerance. So lemons generally, if you look at the table lemon that we get, Eureka or whatever it is, they really can't take really deep cold where going below freezing, it kills them. Whereas the Meyer lemon will actually survive colder we're not talking about Canadian temperatures or even New England temperatures, but they can take a lot colder than a normal lemon. Plus, if you can get lemons and you line them all up in a row and you eat them, the Meyer lemon actually has more flavor to it. It's not just citric acid. There's flavor to it. And, when they're in fruit in there, I eat them every day. I put it on my salads and stuff like that where, and you can even eat it's the odd thing is you can eat the whole thing. You can even eat the skin on it. It has some flavor to it. Wow. But there are citrus that you can do that too. We have, and I don't know, it never made popularity. I'm still hoping the best for this little plant. We started propagating it again. We're grafting it now, so the root system is a little stronger, but it's called the sunquat, which is basically a giant kumquat, being giant, probably about, 2 or 3 inches across. And it's perfectly, you can eat it like an apple, just bite into it. Because a kumquat, you can eat the skin, right? So we have it's probably one of the oldest plants in the greenhouse. It's a Nagami kumquat. That's the long oval one. And it's been there. I'm listening to the elders and all their stories. So this information was never written down. It was told in stories, sort of like, our indigenous culture. And supposedly it came to the greenhouse during the Depression. My uncle was selling flowers at that time. That's the way they made their living. They went from door to door in the wealthy neighborhoods, which is nearby, and also Providence. And he made friends with some of these folks that were wealthy and had little greenhouses. And this was an elderly woman who was coming to the end of her time. And she wanted this, kumquat tree to go somewhere where it could live beyond. And she was elderly and had had it most of her life.
Wow.
And so that goes back into the 1850s, probably.
Wow. This is the sunquat, you're saying?
No, this is the kumquat. This is our old kumquat tree.
Oh, okay.
I changed over because the kumquat has got edible skin. The Nagami is one of the most famous of them. Matter of fact, there are a lot of kumquats. We grow 4 varieties of true kumquats, and Nagami is the most vigorous, but it's the worst to eat. I don't eat them anymore because I ate too many when I was a kid, but the interior is just as sour as can be, and you eat the outside where you get some sweetness. And as a kid, you're not really into sour, you're into sweetness, but you kind of chew the whole thing up. But anyway, this tree has been there for a very long time. And I've grafted all the other varieties onto it. So it's kind of a multi-grafted tree.
So this is the original one from the old lady?
Yeah. So this goes well. I don't know how it's older than pretty much anything else in our greenhouse. Although long before my time, as the greenhouse was developed, the family, knew all kinds of people in plant worlds and stuff. And people gave us stuff and they got things like we have some really old camellia bushes that are still in the ground. So Logi's was actually a cut flower florist. That was my grandfather. And on the sideline grew tropical potted plants. And when I was growing up, it was the very end of the florist business, but the plants were still there. And they planted them right in the ground. It wasn't in pots, these camellias. And then they harvested the flowers. Believe it or not, a camellia flower for floral work, which is kind of an interesting thing. You have to wire it a certain way. And they'd use them mostly for funeral pieces in the wintertime. But getting back to citrus, so the sunquat came to us probably about 20 years ago from a citrus grower in Texas. He sent me cuttings of it, and I rooted them and grew it. And it's really so. Another thing about kumquats, taking a step backwards, they are heavy, heavy producers. When you get a kumquat, you get a lot of fruit, and I don't care anything there. There's orange quartz, lime quartz, and all these other quartz. They always are heavy producers. There's tons of fruit that come off of them. Because if you ever look at a kumquat tree, especially in the agami, it's just dripping. Ours is just ripening now. I mean, we have quarts and quarts of bushels of these fruit, which we actually pick and sell to our customers because there's so many of them on the tree. So the sunquat actually got that and it's not a known hybrid. I'm sure it's an orange kumquat cross. It was sort of a seedling that come up somewhere and somebody grew it. But it's a very productive tree and it produces over a long period of time. The flowers of citrus have a couple of fragrances, barring the bloodline, which is really unique. But the edibles, like your tangerines and your grapefruits and navel oranges and such, are very, very fragrant. The lemons and the limes are not so much. You can get fragrance out of them. You put your nose into them, you can sniff them, and there's it. But those are the two delineations of fragrance, and the kumquat also, which, by the way, is a summer bloomer. Isn't that odd? Flowers in the middle, flowers in the middle of the summer, way out of cycle, and it only does one huge surge. And usually at that time of year, the ventilators are open, so the honeybees and stuff come in and pollinate it very well for us. But the kumquats have that very high fragrance, and so this sunquat actually has that same fragrance to it. So it's very fragrant. It does flower seasonally, so the fruit is right now starting to ripen. And as I said, you can take a fruit about as big as that, and you just bite right into it and just eat the whole thing up like you would an apple. Wow, it's delicious.
So can you grow it outside in the summer then, or do you keep?
Oh yeah, well, you want to put your citrus out in the summertime. I mean, hate it. They hate being in indoor situations where the light is low. And when you bring them in the fall, you're going to get leaf drop. It just happens. It even happens in the greenhouse and to some degree. Right now we have a place where we keep one house where we keep all of our stock citrus. It's not necessarily pretty because they're all kind of stuck together and jammed in, but we get our sign wood off of them and we get our cutting wood off of them. And they go through a period of leaf drop, and it's just ending right now. And that stabilizes, but there's, the whole plant is thinned out a bit. And then there's going to be this surge, and it's beginning because I was just in there yesterday looking at stuff. There's shoots starting to come out and little buds starting to come out everywhere. This is only like the 1st of January. They might be a little ahead of cycle right now, but it's starting because everything is going past. And now that they sense that day length, that increasing day length, we've had a very mild winter here, as you probably have. And, the warmth of the day is increasing things. So that whole process is starting. And, so you've got those two cycles, those two different pieces of the citrus family that, their flowers are entirely different in terms of fragrance. And the sunquat, as I said, it's a kinky tree. It goes this way, that way, this way. You can't prune it out shapely, but they look pretty good when they get old. And the other thing that you want to remember about citrus is that they usually die from root rot. So people that are growing them need to remember that the death of that plant, other than the fact that you never water them, right, it's going to happen because of root disease. And the citrus plants are highly susceptible to it, some more than others. And plants that are grown on their own root system, which is done by cutting, can tend to be a little more than when we do the grafting. So we try to graft a lot of plants. Grafting is whenever you go to a nursery and you're going to buy a plant, the grafted plant is always more expensive. But that's because there's this huge cycle you have to go through to produce it. Not all your grafts take, so you're going to have a whole lot of, we call it shrinkage, in your production. And then, you've got to grow the understock, and then you got to cut the understock down, and then you got to grow another plant out of that. And so this whole thing takes a whole lot of time. But we do graft onto disease-resistant rootstock, which is swingle and the macrophylla. Those two citrus, they're both, distant hybrids. Swingle comes off of pomelo, so that's a citramelo. So that has a trifoliate leaf on it. Yeah. And those two have very good root resistance. And I just stumbled across these over time because nobody really thinks about that. But we need to think about it because we're the container growers that are struggling with root rot.
Can you give me a symptom of root rot? Do the leaves?
Yeah, you pull your plant out. Roots do not die from old age. So you take your plant, you tap it out, and you look, and that root system should be all healthy. And in its active growing, it should have white tips on it. If it's inactive, you should see maybe tan roots, but when you touch them, they're fleshy. If you have dead roots in there, they didn't die from old age. They died from something. And so plants so if we put a citrus in the ground, right, in this old greenhouse ground that's been growing God knows what for how many years, right? It's probably all worn out, although it looks pretty good. You don't get that because there's always new roots compensating for the disease pressure that's on that root system. But in a pot, they don't have that ability. And also in pots, you have periods of wetness and cool that can stop that process. So it's usually that when you bring them in from the summertime, you look at them, the roots are healthy, but as they go through the winter and the low light, there's not much vigor there. There's other things that sort of like promote it. One is excessive fertilizer. So you're feeding too much, that creates soft tissue. And then the rots are what we call water molds. Those are Pythium and Phytophthora, and they tend to thrive obviously under high moisture levels. And so, the recommendation for counteracting that is to grow your plant drier. And citrus can take it really dry. Trust me. I mean, really dry. So in our production, we use a lot of drip lines. All our citrus hang way up in the top of the greenhouses on these drip lines. And every now and then you'll get a plant where, the emitter, that's the thing that brings the water in, plugs up or something. You go in there, you look at the plant, you go, oh my God, it's dead. The thing is shriveled. And you take that down and give it a drink and it comes back to life. I've just been astounded at what has actually survived. No, there is an end to that, right? If you go too far, it dies. They can take it drier than they can wet. And that's, sometimes you read on these forums, citrus growers, us hobbyists that are doing that. You'll see them. Yeah, I really let it get dry. I let it go into a wilt before I water it. And that's actually not a bad idea in the wintertime. Because don't forget, this time of year, except a few plants, they're really not growing very much. Some of our lemon trees right now, I was just in the production house there, and they were potting up lemons that were in full flush. And because as I said, they don't have that. They don't know when to stop. There was enough light coming through to keep them going, but most citrus are sitting still. And so in that case, you can really dry them down. It doesn't really hurt them that much. So you grow them dry, grow in a terracotta pot. Don't use plastic if you're having trouble with that. That keeps the wet cycle too long. So you want them to dry down. And although citrus can take it really cold, meaning, some of the mandarins can go down below freezing easily, and kumquats. That you don't want to keep those root systems cold, obviously, because that kind of encourages the disease. So, the best thing to do is to try to keep them above 60. We try that stock house that we grow them in, we keep it above 60, probably about 62. And, they do much better in there. And that doesn't mean you can't grow them cold. If you do, you just got to be really cautious about how you water them and manage them. And then you can get through that.
The warmer the conditions, then you'll just adjust your watering accordingly. So in a dry situation in a centrally heated house, you'll give it a little bit more water than if it's in that cold house like you described.
Yeah. And so the whole way to water is you look at the soil. You look at the plant. Is it wilting? You look at the soil. If the soil's dark and wet, you leave it alone. If it's turned light, you give it a drink. That's everything, with the exception of probably 10 or 12 plants that we grow, which keep evenly moist. Calatheas are one of them. Some of the ferns and things like that need it evenly moist. It's probably more than a dozen, but it's not too many. Most everything wants to be grown that way. And on the citrus, we're saying that in the wintertime, you want to aerate even more. So my father always said, it's good to wilt a plant. He always told me that. It's good to wilt a plant. And what that does is it allows oxygen, because your roots are breathing. We don't think of that. We think the leaves are all transpiring and doing their carbon, the CO2 oxygen transfer. It's actually the root system does the same thing. And you don't want to shut that off.
Coming up, Byron has some more citrus crops for us and talks more about how to succeed growing citrus in pots. That's coming up in just a moment. A shout out today to everybody who came to our vertical vegetables camp last week. Donna and I talked all about how to do vertical vegetable gardening, and it was really fun to connect with people from coast to coast. So thanks for joining us. We have some new content on the website, foodgardenlife.com, and new this week all about edible flowers, how to weave edible flowers into your garden, into your edible landscape, and how to use them. That's at foodgardenlife.com. You're listening to the Food Garden Life Show.
The show that helps you grow food, whether it's on a balcony, in a backyard, or bigger.
And now back to our chat with Byron Martin, author of Edible Houseplants, Grow Your Own Citrus, Coffee, Vanilla, and 43 other tasty tropical plants. Before we started today, Donna and I were talking about the citron that you have in the book. And we were both very interested in citron. And we should probably bring that one up for listeners. Tell us about citron, Byron.
The citron, Citrus medica, is a fruit really known in the Middle East. It's has a religious significance to the Jewish population. And actually, our citron, the Tarangi, which is this giant, I mentioned that before, is this huge fruit. I mean, it's all relative to the size of the plant, obviously, but it's huge. Came to me from a Jewish man that was very interested in citrus, and he brought me the seeds of it. And the interesting thing is that they are one of the few citrus that actually can go from seed to fruit in a very short time. You can get seeds of that, and in 3 years, you'll have plants flowering.
Yeah.
They are also short-lived plants. So this is not the lemon tree or the kumquat tree that's going to live for hundreds of years. We get about maybe a decade and a half out of them, then they go into a decline. And I don't know if that has to do with our container culture or that's just the nature of them. They also are very much like lemons and limes in terms of their flowering cycle and their fruit production. So the citron will actually produce over a longer period of time. As I mentioned, the fragrance is not there. It's more lemon-like. So the flowers don't have a great fragrance to them. They tend to be very open and kind of gangly plants. At least they do in the greenhouses in pots. They flour fairly heavy, but because this fruit is so big, we can never expect too much off of them in terms of container plants. Now, it's really the rind or the skin that's eaten on them. And inside, if you cut them open, there's, pulp inside. It's sour. You can use it for lemon juice and things like that. But that thick rind can be very sweet and edible. It's often candied. There's one called Buddha's hand. I don't know if you've ever seen it.
Yes.
Yes.
Right. So ours have this like Buddha's fist, and very seldom do they make the hand. Right. And we were told just recently that, that the growers really cherish the fist, which we make all the time. And it's obviously got something to do with the greenhouse culture. But we have Buddhist fists most of the time. Occasionally we get a few hands. And that one's not, I mean, it's edible, but there's not as much pulp around that as the larger citrons. Yeah.
So you can eat them fresh. You can eat the citrons fresh with
candy.
So I've only seen them candied. So that's interesting.
Yeah, well, there's more sugar in the candy. It's definitely sweeter, but it is sweet, I mean, if you take a grapefruit and try to eat the pith on that, the outer skin is pretty bitter.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a great plant to grow.
In your book, you mentioned frequently about this indoor conservatory concept. And I'm really struggling with that because we have a cold climate where I am. And I certainly can't turn my greenhouse into a conservatory. So how would you suggest people do that? What are the perfect conditions that you think of when you think conservatory?
The conservatory is simply a greenhouse, nothing more than that. It gives you full light. And then in the conservatory, you see it in your imagination, it's tall walls with these fancy ceilings and all this stuff around it. But really, it's just a greenhouse.
So we can have a conservatory, or if we're bringing them into our houses where we're dealing with potted specimens, be prepared for that leaf drop that you were mentioning and really pay attention to watering less over the winter.
Correct. And even in the greenhouses where you have high light, you're going to get that leaf drop. The way I understand it is just they are on really high light and they're going to get diminished light and going into the short days. So, when do we move our plants in? Usually in September. We leave them out to the last minute, right? Because we want to give them all. And that's probably the worst thing because, when you get to October, things are just shutting down. I swear to God, I never think it's going to happen, but it always does, right? You get to the end of the year and you're going, oh, summer's going to go on forever. I know it will. And it doesn't. You hit November and it's all done. Yeah. And, I think in terms of light level, we have just enough light here in Connecticut. And if you go farther north, it's even worse, to grow a plant, to keep it alive and moving just forward. Once you get underneath the structure of a greenhouse with all the sash bars and glazing and all the piping and everything overhead, you've lost that. And so then everything literally stalls. And not everything. I mean, there are plants that grow, can grow into very low light and still produce leaves and such things.
So we've talked about lemons and limes, which people will know. We talked about the blood lime, which might be new, and the sunquat. And one that I really did want to get to, you have a lot in the book, but I wanted to get to the Calamandan oranges just because it's one that I see for sale so much. So I suspect a lot of people have probably tried. And what tips do you have for Calamandan oranges?
So the Calamandan is actually a hybrid of the kumquat. There we go. And it produces a lot of fruit, right? And it also has a very dense habit to it. The leaf structure is very dense. And so therefore the production of fruit is very dense. And that in itself is why it's become so popular. It's been popular for, longer than I've been alive. The Calamandan orange is the houseplant, the citrus houseplant of all times.
Yeah.
And yet they're really inedible in the sense that they're sour as can be, and you can't eat the skin. Well, you can, but it's not that good. So there is really no difference in culture for that plant. and it's going to have that cycling of flowering more like the kumquat. So later in the season with one big flush, then it produces all this fruit. The only thing negative about it, if there is any, it's usually grown on its own roots, which do have susceptibility to the diseases we were talking about. So there's one where you really have to be very cautious about your watering and be aware of that. How many times I've seen people bringing in their dying, dead, or half-dead mitis calam. It's citrus mitis is the another name for it. And, you tap out the root system and it's gone. But the good news is that I have seen plants that have been taken down to just the bare minimum and come back out of it. So what it is that the feeder roots get taken out, the trunk roots don't by the diseases. So there's always a hope that we can, once that's happened, that we can start over again with the proper amount of watering and get them to regenerate. And I've seen them come out of it many, many times. We have a variegated one, actually, which is really ornamental. And it produces, a lot of variegated plants don't produce as much fruit, but this is just as heavy a producer. And that plant in the greenhouse is probably close to 40 years old now in a pot, and it almost died once. It went through that. It got some root rot, and it went down, and we took care of it. We made sure the watering was proper, and it came back to life. So life does spring eternal.
When you say calamondan is not edible, you can't.
Well, it is edible. You can make marmalade out of it, but you're not going to sit down and, hey, anybody want to have an orange? It's like, if you want a lemon, that might work. It's sour.
And so that is why you haven't really focused on it in your book. It's not one of the big edible house plants that we're talking about.
But it is really famous. And Steve, that's why you brought it up, because it is famous. Yeah. It's a commercial. There's actually, there's nobody producing container plants of jujitsu, right? You're not going to find those anywhere. Right, but calamondan, you will find that in the trade where there's large production of that in greenhouses for this time of year. They'd start selling it because it smells fruit.
Right.
But from what you're saying, we're way better off to get something like a sunquat, which has a much nicer fruit.
Yeah, or believe that. Well, as I said before, it's a very tight grower, and it could be maintained at 2 to 3 feet forever. If we went into an edible like a mandarin, like a tangerine, which are, really delicious when you eat them, you're going to probably have to add another foot or two onto the plant as it grows older. Just because the whole nature of the plant is much bigger. It doesn't have that contained foliage and growth that the mitis or the calamondan does. Yeah.
Okay. Right, well, I might try one. Maybe I'll then have to take up making marmalade. I'm not sure.
All right. Well, Donna, you and I can get together for some marmalade.
There you go.
Good. This has been great, Byron. And maybe as we wrap up, do you have any top citrusy tips for people thinking about getting into citrus? I know you've talked about don't overwater. Is there anything else people should think about?
Yeah, well, the important thing is you got to give them sunlight, because if you go into places where citrus is grown, they do not grow them in the shade. So don't try to grow them in the middle of the room. I probably wouldn't recommend a north window. East to west is possible. South is the best thing. So you really got to give them the high light. And the best citrus that I've ever seen grown were right in sunny southern windows. Yeah, so you're going to have that light. There are problems with insects, and you got to watch out for spider mite. It's a very common one that you bring in from outdoors. There's also scale insects, but scale insects are something that you're going to probably buy. You're going to buy the scale insects with the plant, and you're not going to know it. Or the plant next to it has it, and it jumps over. And mealybug is the same thing. Citrus are very susceptible to that. That's a Rutaceae family. Everything Rutaceae gets mealybugs, A lot of other things do too. But there's things that usually have a contamination prior to you growing them. And, other than that, you just got to get your pruning shears out and prune at the right time. So once you're plant, you can prune it any time of the year, but once the plant is starting to flower, you're going to see where your fruit's going to form, and then you can do the trimming to maintain height and form on it. And pruning is best done in early part of the year and not late. So you want to go into the winter with as much foliage as possible so that it's pulling that moisture out of the soil as rapidly as possible to keep your root system healthy.
It's all connected. You are so smart. This has been so much fun.
This is great. Yeah. Okay. Well,
I
thank you.
love plants, as you can see.
Yeah. Do you have visitors come to the greenhouses? Is that
Yeah, by all means, if anybody is nearby, come and see us. It's a crazy place. I mean, this is not the normal greenhouse.
Donna, maybe one day you and I should organize a busload of Canadians to come down for a visit. Byron, thanks so much for hanging out with us to talk about citrus as houseplants today. Just love to hear what you have to say, and really excited about your book.
Well, thanks for having me. I was glad to be here. And as you can see, I always love to talk about plants.
Thank you.
I loved it.
That was our chat with Byron Martin, owner of Logie's Greenhouse and co-author of the book Edible Houseplants: Grow Your Own Citrus, Coffee, Vanilla, and 43 Other Tasty Tropical Plants. So Donna, what jumped out at you in our chat with Byron?
Oh, so many interesting things. I think that whole timing of pruning, most people don't think about that. And as he said, your citrus are going to lose their leaves in the fall. So don't prune them in the fall. They're already losing leaves. I loved that tip. So prune them instead in the spring, once you can see where the flowers are coming. And that's how you can keep your plants small enough to realistically grow them as a house plant, because the theme of edibles as house plants, so fascinating. So that pruning tip was huge. And also, of course, the fact that, well, I just love the way he talked to us about letting your citrus dry out. We know they're normally from the Mediterranean regions, and yet we continue to water all winter. So I loved Byron. I thought that was fantastic. What did you like, Steve?
Well, I like that he really emphasized letting those citrus plants dry out, because I see so many people with dying citrus plants, and it's usually overwatering. And it just makes me think of this method that they use in Sicily in commercial lemon production, where they let the plants get so dry that they're wilting before they irrigate them. And what it does, though, is it actually induces a bloom so they can get a crop that is out of season. But I think the fact that they do that commercially really speaks to the fact that those citrus plants are tolerant, and you're far better off stressing them out a bit by letting them get too dry than watering them too much.
And I did that accidentally here in Calgary. Did I tell you I moved my citrus, my Meyer lemon, into my garage?
No.
A really ancient furnace in there that we got revived a little bit, but we keep it at the lowest setting. So I absolutely told our house sitter when we were away, do not water the lemons. And when I came back, all wilted. But you're right, they're all in full bloom now. And this is like early in the year. It's too early for blooms, but I am thrilled.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, I know, listening to Byron, I decided that I need to get one of those sunquats. That's something I don't have. I love the sound of that. Was there any citrus that you got a sense that you'd like to grow?
I already have finger limes. I'm ahead of you on that. But the blood finger limes, well, now that just sounds fantastic. I'm going to start digging in and find a blood finger lime, because he's right. My regular finger limes are just occasionally blooming, but those blood finger limes, that's my next conquest.
They sound good. Maybe you and I will have to take a trip down to Logie's.
Oh, for sure. That's a for sure. You have to do that.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Donna. We'll see you next time.
All right. Thank you, Steve.
We'd love it if you drop by to say hi online at foodgardenlife.com. We have articles about growing fruit, veg, using your homegrown produce, also about growing figs and lemons in cold climates. So say hi. Tell us the topics that would help you grow more of your own. While you're at foodgardenlife.com, also grab our free newsletter. Subscribers get the subscriber-only cold climate fig guide and small space food gardening tip sheet.
You can head over to my website and grab my really cool printable PDF for a seed packet. You can personalize it for each type of seeds that you save. DonnaBalzer.com. Have a look.
You're listening to the Food Garden Life Show. I'm Stephen Biggs.
And I'm Donna Balzer, here to help you grow.